Going on a cruise ship can be fun and exciting. You can meet new people, enjoy some sunshine, and perhaps a few drinks. Friends, family, and happily married couples love the cruise ship atmosphere. And by all accounts, so do these two. The McGills, along with some friends, enjoy a day off ship in Cabo. Drinks are poured, and Robert, Shirley, and friends let loose. But this day of celebration will end in a brutal murder on the high seas. By all accounts, Robert and Shirley McGill are happily married when they board a 5-day cruise from San Diego to Cabo San Lucas on July 11th, 2009. The McGills are high school sweethearts who find each other again at their 30th high school reunion.
Shirley has 4 children from a previous marriage, and Robert has 2.
They'd marry soon after and live in a quiet cul-de-sac in the San Fernando Valley.
Bob and Shirley seem like the perfect couple. Everyone who knows them says they love each other so much, neither one of them ever has a bad word to say about the other.
Robert's friends call him a free thinker. They find him to be calm and pleasant. He loves to play guitar in his spare time. Shirley is known for her love of animals and being a proud and loving grandmother. She's also a music lover. By all accounts, the couple are made for each other. In 2009, Shirley celebrates her retirement from the Department of Motor Vehicles, where she worked as a field agent for 11 years. Robert also plans to retire after a 30-year career teaching at-risk teens throughout Los Angeles. Known by colleagues as dedicated to his work, Robert had spent most of his recent years tutoring pregnant teens in an alternative high school. Robert and Shirley both deserve a reward for years of hard work, and this cruise is going to be just that. Not to mention, it's a great way to celebrate their upcoming birthdays.
After 3 days on the cruise, Bob and Shirley have already made a really good impression. Everybody likes spending time with them. They seem to be very happy. They seem to be madly in love. Nothing at all is amiss until Bob's birthday.
July of 2009, They're both celebrating their 55th birthdays within about a week of each other. So on July 14th, 2009, they're seen leaving the ship with another couple.
Their destination, the port city of Cabo San Lucas. Cabo San Lucas is the 5th largest tourist destination in Mexico. Located on the Baja Peninsula, Cabo is only a single day's cruising time from San Diego, which makes it a preferred stop for those who want an affordable cruise and a shorter time frame. Cabo San Lucas prides itself on being a resort city where the party never stops.
Cabo tends to be a party town. It's the perfect place to spend your birthday. You're going to see people out having a great time. You may even see some conga lines.
The McGills celebrate in Cabo San Lucas with friends they've made on the cruise.
What could be better than spending your birthday on a cruise in Cabo? You're having a great time, you have lots of new friends around you, you have the love of your life, you're having some drinks. It's nothing but a great party. It's easy to get out of control in a place like this. If you were at home and it was your birthday, you may have a drink or two. Sure, why not? But in a place like Cabo, you could kind of get carried away and maybe have a few too many. Bob and Shirley and their new friends are definitely doing that.
Many drinks are consumed. Robert shows off his drinking talents, and perhaps the party gets a little excessive. He even goes so far as to pull the scorpion out of a bottle of mezcal. After a long day of celebrating Robert's birthday under the Mexican sun, the passengers return to the ship.
Witnesses tell us when they returned to the ship that day, Robert was pretty intoxicated. In fact, to the point where he could barely walk.
Alcohol is not exactly a rarity on board a 5-day cruise to Cabo. But Robert is so inebriated that strangers take notice. It's painfully obvious that Robert has overdone it while off the ship.
One college-age passenger saw Robert on the cruise ship intoxicated. His opinion was that Robert really needed to sleep it off. The McGills returned to their cabin around 6 p.m. on July 14th. And as far as we know, that's the last time Shirley McGill was seen alive.
On his 55th birthday, Robert McGill spends the day celebrating with his wife Shirley and other passengers from his cruise in Cabo San Lucas.
So we know Shirley and Robert went to their cabin in the late afternoon. Robert appeared by himself a few hours later that day and met up with some friends.
When Robert meets with his new friends, he's slurring his speech, incoherent and wobbly. Clearly, Robert is not in the right state of mind.
They really thought he was still intoxicated at that point.
Although Robert's friends are happy to see him, things get worrisome quickly when they notice something strange on his hand.
Bob's new friends notice blood on his hands. They're concerned. They ask, "Where's Shirley? Is she okay?"
What Robert tells them chills the other passengers to the bone.
And unbelievably, he leans back and says, "She's dead. She's dead. I murdered my wife, the woman you all found so amusing." Of course, they can't believe this is true. This seems crazy. Why would anyone casually admit to murdering their wife? It must be drunken nonsense.
Robert McGill's admission to his friends was so shocking to them that they couldn't believe it. They figured he was either in shock or he must be making the entire thing up.
The friends that Robert and Shirley have just made cannot believe what they're hearing. Horrified by Robert's statement, the passengers rush to contact ship security. They spot ship security and wave them over. And then they give a disturbing account of what Robert told them, that he has killed Shirley.
At this point, ship's investigators are really at a loss. There's a cold-blooded murder after a birthday celebration in port, and this guy just admits to it. I mean, who could do that?
Bob and Shirley's new friends don't want to believe this is true. It just sounds too crazy. But they still feel they need to alert the crew and the investigators as to what they've heard. But the problem is they were just drinking buddies. They don't even know Bob and Shirley's last name.
In order to verify Shirley's well-being, ship security needs to determine Robert and Shirley's full names and then correlate the names to a room number. Only then can they search for Robert McGill's alleged victim. Is what Robert said really true? After a day of laughter and happiness between friends, could it be that a horrific crime has taken place? Or is this just a made-up tale from someone with a twisted sense of humor?
The investigators know time is of the essence now. They need to find Shirley as soon as possible to confirm or deny Bob's story. That's the most important thing. Maybe Shirley's hurt. Maybe they can still help her.
Robert continues to stumble along the ship with drink in hand. And soon, ship security have spotted him. He's approached about the incident. When ship security finally catches up to Robert McGill, Robert tells them to take him to the brig.
It's highly unusual for someone to just confess to killing their wife the way Robert has. And even more unusual to offer yourself to be arrested. He didn't try to run, didn't try to hide. This raises suspicions quite a bit. Even if he hasn't killed his wife, obviously something strange is going on.
Ship security are very concerned about Robert's demeanor and the nonchalant way he admits to the murder. But once he's identified, his cabin can be searched and an answer obtained.
Robert gives the crew his room number and tells them to go and search for his dead wife.
Ship security rushes to room R24. Although Although ship security officers typically aren't trained to investigate crimes as serious as murder, in this case, the decision is made to search the McGills' cabin to determine if what Robert claims about having killed his wife is true. The crew searches the McGills' cabin. Inside, they make a grisly discovery.
In this little small space that the body was found in, I would be looking to make sure that, did she sustain any type of fall? Was there any head trauma? Is there any injuries to the body that indicate that she fell? If there are none, what else are we looking for? Are there bruises or lacerations or open wounds to her body that indicate that there might be evidence of an assault to her body?
Ship security do their best to note the condition of the body and the room itself.
Even if you've been working in this field for years, it never gets easier to go into a crime scene. You never know exactly what you're going to find, and it's always horrible. What happened in the McGills' cabin must have sickened the investigators.
Shirley's body is found on the bathroom floor of their cabin. Even to an untrained eye, it would be hard not to notice that Shirley has been severely beaten.
Investigators have discovered a grisly murder scene. Shirley's body is severely beaten and probably strangled, and there's blood everywhere.
So if you were to find a body in a bathroom that has sustained significant blows to her torso and abdomen, you would specifically find injuries on the body that are consistent with bruising, and sometimes if the individual was wearing like a boot mark, a foot stomp to the torso, you would see that actually come up as a very large bruise within the abdomen and torso on a body.
Upon the discovery of his dead wife, Robert is immediately taken in for questioning by the ship security. Robert tells ship security that he punched Shirley once in the stomach.
It's really hard to believe Bob's story. Things just aren't adding up. The number one question we always have when something like this happens is why? And Bob can't answer that. All he does tell the investigators is that he doesn't know, but he does know for sure it was nothing that Shirley did that provoked him. Also, his story about one single punch to the stomach just doesn't add up. There's no way that kind of damage could be done by hitting someone in the stomach.
Ship security places a call to the FBI office in San Diego. The race begins to find answers in the murder of Shirley McGill. Shirley McGill, loving grandmother and new retiree. Shirley and her husband Robert celebrate their 55th birthdays with the 5-day cruise from San Diego to the resort city of Cabo San Lucas.
July 14th, 2009 was Robert McGill's 55th birthday. They did exactly what they wanted to do to celebrate. They got off the ship and had a great time in Cabo.
But the day of Robert's birthday celebration ends in Shirley's brutal murder. Ship security finds Shirley's body and notes how she has been severely beaten. Robert says he killed his wife with a punch to the stomach, but his story doesn't match the far more sinister crime scene.
The evidence at this crime scene would show that there was no way this could have been just one punch to the stomach. The FBI is called in to investigate.
A call is placed to the FBI back in the United States. They waste no time. FBI agents take a Coast Guard cutter to intercept the ship on international waters.
It wasn't so long ago that the FBI wouldn't have been allowed on a cruise ship to investigate this kind of a crime. This change is due to cruise ship victims who banded together and lobbied Congress to get the rules changed. Now, because of them and their hard work, FBI agents are allowed to come onto a cruise ship, even when it's in international waters, to investigate a crime if that crime occurred to an American citizen.
There's a short time frame for FBI investigators here because this is a ship of about 2,000 passengers and it can't be held here indefinitely. They need to clear this up quickly.
Robert's story continues to just not add up. He only punched her once in the stomach. Where did all these other wounds come from? Obviously, there wasn't a second assailant, so he must not be telling the truth.
But what if there were a second suspect? Is it possible that someone other than Robert might have been responsible?
Robert was clearly drunk the night of July 14th. Is it possible somebody snuck in and attacked Shirley a second time?
What if another, previously unknown individual had been involved and carried out the attack? Robert has admitted guilt, but could this information be wrong? Could it have been someone else who met Shirley at some point in the day? Could this attack have taken place under the cover of Robert's inebriation? When the FBI interview Robert McGill, he is still clearly intoxicated.
It's pretty clear that Bob is still inebriated. He's slurring his words, he keeps repeating himself. Investigators get him to admit that he's actually had at least 20 drinks over the course of the day.
FBI agents notice Robert's knuckles are scraped and scuffed. It looks like he's been in a fight. The passengers who Robert confesses the murder to mention markings on Robert's hands. Bloody scrapes that make them suspect he was in some kind of violent rendezvous. Considering the marks on Robert's hands and the statement made by the other passengers, the FBI dismissed the theory of a second assailant.
There's just no evidence to support the hypothetical second attacker. It's not plausible.
However, it's possible that Bob just doesn't have a firm grip on the details.
During his interview with the FBI, Robert calls one of his two grown sons.
While investigators are in the room, Robert takes the phone and has a conversation with his son. He tells him that he killed Shirley and he wanted to know if it had been on TV yet. He said it was by accident, but not by accident.
In spite of Bob's claims that Shirley did nothing to provoke him, it's hard to believe that this just happened out of the blue. Did he mean to kill his wife? What he said to his son on the phone seems to indicate that. Investigators are having a really difficult time getting to the bottom of this one. It still just doesn't make sense. Why would Robert kill a woman he apparently loved, who everyone said they were so happy together? Was it alcohol-fueled rage? Was it a crime of passion? Did he snap? They just can't seem to find any answers.
Investigators must shed light on why Robert McGill killed his wife Shirley aboard this Mexican cruise. Time is running out to find the answers. On his 55th birthday, Robert McGill consumes more than 20 drinks and murders his wife Shirley in a bathroom of their cabin. The FBI boards the ship off the Mexican coast to investigate.
Robert knew Shirley was dead, and he admitted doing it. There were no other suspects on the ship, and Robert told his son that he had killed Shirley. The real mystery for the FBI is to determine what drove Robert to do what he did to Shirley.
When something like this happens, all the friends and family want to know is why. Why would something like this happen? Why would Robert kill his childhood sweetheart, a woman that he apparently was very happy with? What would his motive possibly be? However, sometimes, unfortunately, there are no good answers.
The FBI interviews more than 50 passengers, but can't come up with any leads that would explain what they have discovered.
Even the investigators can't give up this idea that there has to be a motive. There has to be an answer to that question. Why would Robert do this? They're hoping that maybe there's some clue either in the recollections of the other passengers or in his phone call to his son that will answer that question.
Could Shirley's murder have been a crime of passion?
If Robert was jealous at all of Shirley and any attention she may have gotten on the cruise, it's not something he's admitting in the interview.
Could Shirley have flirted with another passenger, catching the jealous eye of Robert?
Robert hasn't been known to be a jealous guy. Of course, jealousy is the most common motive in a case like this. Still, if another man caught Shirley's eye or Robert was jealous, he doesn't remember. He's not saying any of those things in the interview. Plus, it just doesn't seem to suit his personality.
There are no witnesses of a love triangle or another man. There's just no evidence to support this hypothesis.
Robert and Shirley loved each other. They never spoke negatively about one another in front of friends, family, or co-workers. All the passengers the FBI interview say the McGills are likable and pleasant. If this is a crime of passion, investigators can't find any evidence to support that theory. They have to find another motive. Perhaps Robert's financial situation would shed light on a reason for Shirley's murder.
Robert was about to lose his job. He taught at-risk youth for 30 years, but the school he worked at was about to close.
Teaching is highly rewarding, but it can also be quite draining. So when Robert's school closes, surprising him, he decides, maybe it's time to call it a day and do something different. But the question is, could he really afford to retire if this was a surprise? Maybe something to do with his finances brought him to this point.
Newly retired herself, Shirley McGill wants to move to Oregon and be closer to her children. Robert says he'll join her as soon as he retires.
Who really knows what was in Robert's mind and in his heart when this cruise began?
And when investigators delve into Robert McGill's past, they discover something that could explain a financial motive.
Robert had been married once before and went through a very lengthy divorce. In fact, it had bankrupted him. So when he got back together with Shirley, he was destitute.
Robert marries Shirley in 2003 after rekindling things at their 30th high school reunion. Could Robert have done it for the money?
If Robert was a black widow or he fancied himself a master criminal, he was a really bad one. You don't confess to a murder if you want to get away with it and collect the insurance money.
Nothing in Robert's confession leads FBI to conclude he was looking to cash in on Shirley's death. In San Diego, Robert McGill is brought into custody, admitting to Shirley's murder. But no one knows why he did it, and Robert has gone silent. Investigators are at a loss. Why did Robert McGill murder his wife, Shirley?
If Robert isn't going to come clean about what happened, and the investigators so far have no clues as to why this happened, perhaps Shirley can tell them.
Investigators hope the autopsy of Shirley McGill might deliver evidence that will explain her murder. A birthday celebration for two high school sweethearts in love. Robert and Shirley McGill party hard in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. Robert is very intoxicated when they return to the ship around dinner time. 2 hours later, Robert has killed Shirley and admits it to fellow passengers. Medical examiners perform an autopsy on Shirley to determine the cause of death.
The autopsy reveals that both blunt force trauma to her head and strangulation were the cause of death.
In terms of the blunt force trauma and internal bleeding that this individual sustained during her assault, there would be significant lacerations and blood found within the peritoneal cavity of the abdomen.
Coroners say there's so much internal bleeding, it looks like Shirley has been in a car accident. They find 200 cc's of blood in her pelvic area. Hemorrhaging is also found in the liver, spleen, adrenal glands, mesentery, pancreas, kidneys, bowels, and colon.
The main cause of death could be listed as strangulation. Contributing factors such as the blunt force trauma that this individual received to the torso and the stomach was contributory to her death.
Coroners say they've never seen anything like this before. This certainly wasn't a single punch to the stomach. The level of violence in this crime is gruesome. Bob strangled Shirley and beat the hell out of her. The violence is unprecedented.
The autopsy reveals Shirley is lifted up by the neck so high that her feet leave the ground.
The effect of alcohol on the crime scene of this nature showed that the individual portrayed no inhibitions. He was angry and violent, and he continued to beat and torture this individual to succumb to her injuries.
Investigators discovered at the crime scene that Shirley's underwear had been torn in half and her skirt had been lifted above her waist. The autopsy also confirmed that this had been a brutal attack.
One has to wonder what would drive Bob McGill to attack his wife this way, tearing at her clothes, the horrible violence of the assault. It doesn't make any sense. This goes far deeper and far darker than a simple punch to the stomach.
Law enforcement now knows just how aggressive Robert was that night. But Robert tells investigators he has no recollection of his attack on Shirley. He says he has no idea why he did it.
Could this be another case of the alcohol made me do it? Bob certainly seems to think so. He claims that he just drank so much that he lost control of himself.
To top it off, Robert claims he drank mezcal. And mezcal is a liquor made from agave fruit. Its trademark is a scorpion at the bottom of the bottle, and the urban legend is that it causes hallucinations.
Tequila is a type of mezcal. Mezcal tends to have a very high alcohol content. But do we really believe that alcohol is the reason Bob did this? Lots of people drink to excess and they don't end up murdering their wives.
It is important to note that mezcal does not contain mescaline. Mescaline is the substance derived from the peyote plant. Nothing Robert ate or drank that day contained mescaline. Mescaline does in fact cause hallucinations, but he didn't consume it.
How intoxicated was Robert McGill? Was the extreme violence spurred on by a hallucination? Robert McGill plainly admits to killing his wife. Now his lawyers prepare an intoxication defense to spare Robert from a lifetime behind bars. Robert McGill admits to fellow passengers that he killed his wife and high school sweetheart, Shirley. He leaves her beaten, strangled body on the bathroom floor of their cabin, her clothes torn. There's more internal bleeding than experts would see in a car accident. Robert McGill claims a hallucinogenic scorpion at the bottom of a bottle of mezcal is to blame for him killing Shirley.
The idea that a scorpion at the bottom of a bottle of mezcal can cause a psychotic episode is nothing more than a myth. It's been disproven countless times.
There's no hallucinogenic effects in the alcohol Bob consumed, and there's certainly no way that the scorpion he ate has anything to do with what happened to Shirley.
Prosecutors tried to convince the judge to see it as a vicious murder by a man who showed no remorse. Initially, Robert's defense submits a plea of not guilty, but after a preliminary hearing, Robert's legal team changes the plea to guilty.
When Bob goes to court, he's heard to say that going to trial would be too much of a financial and emotional burden for Shirley's family. Is he finally trying to show some kind of remorse?
Robert and his legal team hope to reason with the judge and avoid a harsh prison sentence.
Even though Robert pled guilty to second-degree murder, he and his legal team asked for a reduced sentence. They pointed to the fact that he taught underprivileged children and that he wasn't himself because of what he had consumed that day. They were hoping that a reduced sentence would get him out in his mid-60s.
But the judge doesn't buy Robert's pleas for a lenient sentence due to intoxication. She notes how severe the attack on Shirley was, and that Robert never shows remorse or asks for help. Shirley's children tell the court how betrayed they feel. Robert claimed to have loved their mother with all his heart. But given how severe and brutal his attack on Shirley was, alcohol or no alcohol, Shirley's family feel like it was all a lie.
Shirley's family is devastated. Her son says it doesn't really matter what Robert achieved in his life. None of that compares to what he did to their mother.
At Robert's sentencing, he shows remorse. He says he's done a horrible thing.
This is a really, really hard trial to be at. The family is sobbing. They've clearly been torn apart by what happened to Shirley. There's no coming back from this. It doesn't matter if Robert is remorseful or not. Nothing is ever going to bring their mother back.
Prosecutors tell the judge whatever decency Robert McGill had is left on the floor of that bathroom next to Shirley's beaten, bleeding, and broken body. The judge notes that Shirley did not immediately die from the multiple blows she sustained, and Robert had to strangle her to kill her.
The judge in this case didn't seem to buy that Robert was so intoxicated he didn't know what he was doing.
The judge isn't buying Robert's story. If he was so drunk, how did he know to finish his wife off?
Robert John McGill receives a life sentence for the murder of his wife, Shirley.
Shirley's family cries in relief when the verdict is read. There's no coming back from this. They'll never get their mother back, but at least they know that the man she loved more than anything, the man who betrayed her, the man who brutally murdered her, is going to be in prison for the rest of his life.